but I'll do my best with it. Um, and we've had very encouraging responses to the guests that we've had so far, and everything is available online, even if you can't catch it for the live broadcast. Um, so this month is actually the birth month of Lee Konitz, who was a close friend of mine. And I actually made my first record that was available in the United States with Lee when I think I was the age of 20, 24, 25. Um, and it's also the birth month of Warren Marsh, who I just had one interesting encounter with. And I wanted to tell a couple of stories about these cats and talk a little bit about just the nature of what, in Jewish Hebrew, they have a thing called beshert. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. And that's when something is just kind of destined to be. And a lot of the jazz life, not just in my own life, but I find when I talk to the different musicians that I've been talking to, a lot is what you might call serendipity or beshert or however you want to think of it. And maybe in life, a lot of our destinies are shaped by other people. Some might call that as good a definition as what we might call God, as anything there is. Rather than a magical anthropomorphic figure that looks like man. I mean, there are a number of ways to think about it. I think the events that happen between people are the way that the larger than life, the all in all, the creator, or however you want to think of it, shows us the nature of life. At least in my case, that's the closest I've come to that unexplicable, maybe undefinable, or multi-definable force that's here in the world. So I just an example, for example, is how I met Lee Konitz. It was 1969. I was 17 years old, and I was hanging out a lot at the University of Miami in Florida, and I was playing duets a lot with the drummer who was young, my age actually. He was about a year older than me, and his name was Jimmy Chapek, and he was working with Ira Sullivan at the time. And I was sitting in a lot with Ira, who was very generous to the younger cats. God bless Ira. That's another story of synchronicity, let's say. So Jimmy and I were practicing together. Sometimes we just played drums and saxophone for hours. And like I said, I was also hanging out a lot at the University of Miami. I was a guest soloist in the big band under Jerry Coker, though I was still in high school. I didn't go to high school very often, but technically I was in it. Anyway, Jimmy played me this record with Elvin Jones and a bass player named Sonny Dallas. And it was called Motion Lee on Verve Records. And it was by Lee Konitz. And I had heard Lee on some of the Birth of the Cool records with Miles and on the Tristano stuff, and I had liked it. I remembered I was fond of it, but I was so steeped in Charlie Parker that anything, it was good, but I didn't quite, nothing affected me. I was more affected by the Charlie Parker influenced people. And he was an alto player that definitely was under some of the same influences that Charlie Parker was, in that there was Lester Young and he was of that era, but he wasn't playing anything like copying Bird. He wasn't doing that. And I was fascinated by it as soon as I heard the first notes of I Remember You. Ba da 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 do da dee do da dee da da dee da da da. When I heard that, I kept listening to it, and I listened to it. I borrowed the record from Jimmy, and he knew Jimmy Chapek knew he was never going to get that record back. which he didn't, but he understood. I gave him a different record, but or two. Anyway, I was so enamored of this record that, like I said, I listened to it over and over, and it turned out it was Easter vacation at the university, well, in the world. But there was a bulletin board, and I had, my birthday was the end of March, so I had a little money from my grandmother for my birthday, and I had been giving lessons at the university to some of the students there for $3 a lesson at the time. And I'd saved up a little money from that, though mostly that was my expense money. But I had, $30 or $40 saved up, and I saw this ride, $15 round trip with 5 other people in a van from from Miami to New York, with 5 days in New York and then back to Miami. And this would be a perfect time to go to New York. Now, I knew that Lee Konitz was in New York at this time because I always got the Village Voice. I had lived in New York the year before with my dad and gone to a year of high school there. And I always bought the Village Voice. In New York, it was a free paper at the time, but if you were outside of New York, I think you had to pay 50 cents for it or something. And I knew you could get it at Alfie's News. So every week, I had my Village Voice. And at the back of the Voice was a column, which was, it showed lessons, who was teaching music studies of various kinds. And there was a letter, there was an ad in that section of the Voice in the back among music instruction, which said, Lee Konitz, now accepting students, all levels, all instruments, and all levels, advanced, intermediate, beginner, and tone deaf. That was what Lee's article said. And I had told this story a little bit in a different version of the podcast. Anyway, I decided I was going to go up and meet Lee because I was compelled to do so. So I was going to stay with my friend Brooks Kerr, who was a wonderful piano player, blind pianist, and we had gone to Phil Woods' camp together, Ramblerny. And Brooks was also considered one of the world's foremost authorities on Ellington. In fact, Duke had once said, if you want to know something about my band, ask Brooks Kerr. He's our encyclopedia. So, Brooks and I were really best friends. And I would always stay. I was going to stay with Brooks if I came to New York. I'd been there before and stayed with Brooks. And Brooks had a very nice townhouse in the East 60s where he lived with his mother, and it was a lovely apartment. So it was a nice place to stay. So I got in the car and we started driving to New York. And at about 8 o'clock at night, I realized that I hadn't called Brooks. I was so excited about coming to New York and meeting Konitz, I forgot to confirm my place to stay. So we stopped. I gave Brooks a call from around D.C. We were up to Washington, D.C. And I said, Brooks, I'm coming to New York. Is it okay if I stay with you? Brooks said, of course. Sure, but why so suddenly? What's the reason? I said, well, I heard this Lee Konitz record, and I've got to meet him, and read that he's teaching. And I thought I'd, find him, give him a call, And Brooks said, okay, sure. He said, but I'm going to the Half Note tonight to listen to Roy Eldridge. So I won't be there, but, I'll leave the key under a certain plant on my terrace, because he had it was a townhouse. There was a little bit of a terrace near his front door and a secret place for the key. I said, great. He said, make yourself at home. And, so I did. And even though I was 17, I still had a taste for wine. They had a wine cellar. So I came and opened up a nice bottle of, I think, a good red Cabernet of some kind. And I sat there and waited for Brooks to come back from listening to Roy Eldridge. So, about 2 a.m. or so, maybe a little later, Brooks waltzes in with a big smile, looking like the cat who ate the canary on his face. He says, man, because he asked me why I was coming so soon, as I said, so quickly. And I said, I've got to meet this cat, Lee Konitz. So Brooks said, you're not going to believe what happened. he said, I was at the bar at the Half Note listening to Roy, and the Half Note was a very hip place. The Cantorino family would even let guys like Brooks and I, who were underage, sit at the bar as long as we ate food. And they had the best veal parmesan and spaghetti you could believe, so that was easy to do there. And they give us a little children's discount, they called it. But anyway, Brooks said I struck up a conversation on the break after listening to a set of Roy Eldridge with the guy next to me. And he was very erudite. He knew a lot about jazz and a lot about Roy Eldridge. And as it turns out, it was Lee Konitz. And well, I told him about you. And he said, here's an address to come to tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock. You'll be the last student of the day. It's actually Dick Katz, the pianist. It's Dick Katz's studio. And he said to go down there and he'll be there. So I couldn't believe my amazing luck that Brooks had somehow run into Konitz. So I went down the next day, and I got my horn out, and he said, play something. And I think I played Lush Life. And he said, that's really nice, but, you got a nice sound and everything, but can you play something, it's a little more swinging? So I played I'll Remember April, and then he had me playing I'll Remember April at different tempos and different keys, and really took me through the whole 9 yards of I'll Remember April. And then right at the end, Dick Katz walked in, and Lee said, oh, now you can play with a piano player. And we had played duets on it too, because he played with me. Anyway, we had a wonderful time, and I only had, I think he was charging $20 at the time. He said, well, man, how much do you have? Can you afford to give me? Because he was on hard times himself. He wasn't working very much. In fact, we went to have a hot dog after the lesson, and he apologized for not being able to buy me a 35-cent Sabret hot dog because he said he was scuffling and really needed the money. So I said, well, maybe I'll buy you a hot dog. So I did. And I remember telling him, one thing I always respected about you is that, you don't play the Tonight Show or the Merv Griffin Show or do much studio work. You play jazz and you just do that. And this was a very low point in Lee's career. Lee said to me, I hate to disappoint you and burst your bubble, man, but if they called me tomorrow to play a talk show, in the orchestra, I'd have my clarinet. I'd have my clarinet out in a minute to double, because he didn't double. I said he just played saxophone, alto. He said, man, because the jazz business is tough. Anyway, fortunately, his career did get better, and years later he became more venerable and had a pretty successful career, and lived until, well, Lee would be 96 this year. On October 13th, he would have turned 96, and we stayed friends for a long time, and I ended up, like I said, made my first record with him. He let me sit in a lot when I was a kid. From that time on, I'd go to his gigs and he'd bring me up the last set, and I learned a lot. We had to go to his house, we'd play duets, and he was very kind to me, and I was fortunate to have had those experiences with him. So that was sort of an interesting way that we got together, and became a very important part of my life. Warren Marsh, who also would have a birthday this month, I believe he's on the 26th of October, and he would be, I think he's also born in 1927. I believe he would be 96 as well. I had only one experience with Warren, which was kind of funny. He was in California most of the time that I was here. He came to live in New York for a while in the 90s but I was living in Canada and touring Europe a lot, so I wasn't really spending that much time in New York when he was here. So, but I did have one interesting encounter with him. Many of us have heard of my dinner with Andre. This was sort of my dinner slash breakfast with Warren. So Warren Marsh was playing over at a place called Buddy's Place, which Buddy Rich had a club on the Upper East Side for a while in the 70s. And different people would come in and play. And the group he had that week was Super Sax, which was a group of saxophonists plus usually one brass soloist, Connie Candoli. This week they were there at Buddy's Place. It was Carl Fontana, the trombone player. And they would take, for those of you that don't know Super Sax, they would take Charlie Parker solos, and they were arranged for 5 saxophones and played as a saxophone section. And still, people played solos. There were saxophone solos as well. And Warren Marsh was one of the original members of this group, which originated in L.A. Saxophone player Med Flory, I believe, put it together. So Warren was playing a few solos in the course of the evening. And I went and heard him, and his feature was Cherokee, Coco, Bird's version of Cherokee. And Warren improvised solos on it. They played 2 sets, so he played one per set, completely different from each other and brilliant. And it occurred to me, well, why don't I just walk up to him and say hello? So at this point, I was about 23 or 24, about 24, and I was working with Chet Baker. And but I had a night off that night, and I went over to hear Warren with Super Sax over at Buddy's Place. And I introduced myself as a friend of Lee's and Chet, and I asked Warren if I could take him out to breakfast. So he did. We went to a little coffee shop and sat down, and there were a couple of things I remembered about him, which were I found quite interesting. One thing was that he, they called Viceroy was called the thinking man cigarette, and people would always say that Warren was a cerebral, quote, player, which to some extent he was, but he had a lot more than that going. Besides being one of the most brilliant players intellectually, there was a lot of heart in there, if you really listen to Warren, beneath the surface. In fact, Sonny Rollins once told me that Warren was one of his favorite tenor players. And while we had breakfast, we talked about a lot of things, and he stressed the idea of grace. And yes, that you want to play gracefully was a very important thing to him to hear in someone's playing. And he talked about that. And then we were talking about, he said how Bach epitomized, the real grace of music and was as high as you could go. And I happened to mention Mozart because I had been listening to this piece, the Sinfonia Concertante in E flat, that had these double cadenzas for violin and viola. And I said, it sort of reminded me of some of the stuff that you and Lee did, of course, in the different century, but it had a similar value to the counterpoint. And Warren was like, Mozart? I can't stand Mozart. I had never heard before or since anybody really come down on Mozart like that. He said, well, he just played the same licks all the time. And, it wasn't like Bird, but Bird played a lot of the same things, but there was more surprise. Anyway, he wasn't fond of that. And he, and then we had a nice breakfast and talked about music and life. And I noticed he was reading Mysteries. I saw inside his bag. And that was really my only encounter with Warren. But one other encounter I wanted to talk about was a fellow named Davy Schildkraut. And Dave Schildkraut was a wonderful alto player who recorded with Miles Davis on the original record of Solar, with the rhythm section of Horace Silver, Percy Heath, and Kenny Clark. And his solo on the song Solar is, I think, a beautiful solo. And anybody, not just alto players, should sing along with this solo if you want to hear beautiful melodic continuity and construction. It's a real beautiful thing. In a blindfold test, Mingus once mistook Davy Shilkraut for Bird. And he did sound like Bird, but he also didn't. He was kind of right in between Bird and Lee Konitz to me. And my good friend, the pianist Tony Castellano, the late Tony Castellano, had told me when I went from Florida to New York, he said, man, if you're ever in New York and you find Dave Shilkraut, he said, I had the most beautiful day with him. I met him at the Union one day, and I invited him. I told him I was playing a solo piano gig in an Italian restaurant in Brooklyn. He said, oh, maybe I'll come by and fall by and play with you. And he said, sure enough, Dave showed up with his tenor that night. And Tony said it was one of the most beautiful nights he ever spent in music, that Dave Shilkraut came by and that was in the 50s. So here we are in the 70s. And Tony said, if you ever run into Shilkraut in New York, and I had no idea where he was. I knew who he was, but I didn't have any idea. So the night I met Sonny Rollins at the Village Vanguard, I was talking with Sonny, and all of a sudden, Sonny's eyes left our conversation, and he started looking at something like over my shoulder. And I was wondering what he looked at. And then I heard him say, Davy? And Davy said, Sonny. And Sonny said, excuse me. And he walked over, and he and Davy embraced. And it was like, Davy, Sonny, so how you doing? And then Davy says, Sonny, have you grown? He says, yes, Davy, I believe I have. And you? Says, yeah, well, we grow as we grow. And there was Dave Shilkraut, who Tony had told me to run into just a few weeks before. So I went to Dave, and he gave me some interesting advice about music. He said, one thing Sonny does is he plays his own time. He has his own time feeling. He said, and I always tried to play my own time feeling. And even if cats put you down, don't worry about it, because if you know your time feeling is good, then they'll catch up with you. So, but be very secure in your time feeling, and he never heard me play and this and that, but I guess he knew I told him I was a young alto player and had known Tony Castellano, and he remembered that night, and he said, how is he? And he said, but always play your own time. So I got his number, and I said, do you think I could come down? He was living in Brooklyn, I believe, could study with you. He said, sure. And then when I called him a few weeks later, he was abrupt and didn't want to talk to me. And I found out that he had lost his daughter in an accident. And that was why he was rather distant, uncommunicative. So, but it was interesting that I did have that moment. And, a lot of things happen like that. Sort of just, we don't know why, they come out of nowhere. And that's something that I think about all the time. Various things that happened. Meeting Mike Brecker, Tom Harrell was similar. I had a concert to do, and I had a trumpet player playing with me who had become a Scientologist, and he couldn't do the concert because he was going on this boat that L. Ron Hubbard has that sails around the world or something and around the place, but he was going on L. Ron's boat, so he canceled the concert, and I didn't have another trumpet player because the other cat I liked was not available, whose name was John Dirth. And then Mike Brecker called me and he said, man, you've got to meet this trumpet player. And I had just thought about it. who am I going to get? And as I'm thinking who I'm going to get, the phone rang, and it was Mike Brecker saying, man, I'm this trumpet player who just joined us with Horace Silver. Mike was working with Horace, and Randy had just left. And I was thinking of calling Randy, too. That was another thing I was thinking of. But then Mike said, you've got to meet this trumpet player. You guys would be like two peas in a pod. And, here's his number. You should call him. But he doesn't talk very much. We went to Brazil, and he basically stayed practicing in his hotel room. But, so don't be put off by the fact that he doesn't speak. But I called Tom, and it turned out they were off with Horace the week of my concert. And I said, could you come over? We'll rehearse some of the things that I want to play. And Tom said, sure. And he came over, and we hung out. And he told me the whole story of his life. We talked for about 3 or 4 hours, and he ate dinner, and we became very good friends. And when things don't go right, sometimes there's something else that makes it right. So there are those kind of stories. If anybody, I'm just here by myself. I'm going to stick around for a few more minutes. If there's anybody out there listening that wants to talk to me about something, ask me something, tell me something.
So far, we have 6 folks watching. I think they'd love to hear more.
Well, there is there are a few stories. I mean, I could tell you about the story of how I met Sonny Rollins, and that's kind of a good one, especially for one thing that he said. Sometimes these cats just say certain things, Sonny's birthday passed in September, and I had written Sonny a letter. I've been listening to him a lot. I had just turned 20, and Sonny hadn't been playing publicly for a couple of years. This was 1972, and he had just come out of retirement, a second retirement, or one of his retirements, we might say, and was going to play at the Vanguard. So I had been living in Boston, and was considering moving back to New York. I was 20 years old. I just turned 20. I was about to turn 20 that month. And I said, well, Sonny was playing at the Vanguard. So I went down with a few friends, and we took a table at the Vanguard and listened to Sonny playing just wonderfully. Had a great band with Albert Daly on piano, who later became a real close friend of mine. Larry Ridley, who I also had the honor of playing with several times. I had a drummer named David Lee, who became a buddy too. But this was my first exposure to really hearing Sonny live. And I had written them this letter and not mailed it. I was going to send it to the Vanguard because I didn't know how to reach him. And he had said something that had impressed me. I think it's on the liner notes to Sonny Meets Hawk, where it was like a fine person, a good player can play with anybody, just as a fine person can get along with anybody. And I thought that was kind of a lovely statement to make, because, we could talk about that one too. If a fine person can get along with anybody, I'm not sure that some people are meant to get along with, but, I don't know. One of the many things I don't know. So that night I went to the Vanguard, and Sonny was in a red suit, a red kind of jumpsuit kind of outfit, which he looked like sort of, it was like something that Santa Claus might wear, but he could pull it off. And instead of going to the dressing room, he sat down on one of the banquettes after his set, and people were standing in line just saying hello to him. It was like greeting, and he did look like Santa Claus at Macy's, because there he was in this seat, and everybody was standing up and saying, "Sonny, how you doing, man? It's so good to have you back." And the audience was going crazy. He was like playing beautifully, and it was very exciting. So I sat next to him instead of standing in the line. There was a little space next to him to his left. So I just sat there and let him talk to these people. I didn't say anything. And then on a break between talking to these people, he sort of looked at me like, "And you?" And I said, "Well, I introduced myself and told him I was a young saxophone player, and that I had told him I had written this letter to him. And then I said, I really maybe it didn't say the way I wanted it to, but I was going to give it to you. But since I found out you were playing, I came down to listen to you and to talk, So he was very friendly. We talked, and he asked me who my favorite players were and what I liked. And I told him the things I heard in his music, that he was a very good person. And I told him that I had been a protege of Ira Sullivan. And Ira was my key to the world in a lot of ways. That's another story that I will tell at some point. That, Ira, everybody that, even though he never achieved the kind of recognition, largely because he didn't really go to New York and stay there, or even, he went to Florida because of his wife's health originally. And then he just decided to devote himself to his family and do that. But still, if you mentioned Ira to any of the great players, they all had enormous admiration for Ira. And Sonny and Ira had played quite a bit when Sonny spent some time in Chicago in the early 50s. So they had hung out and played and that kind of thing. So I don't know whether that was the reason or not, but Sonny paid attention and we talked about music. So, and even he had a little glass of scotch there. I remembered, and he asked me, you want a sip? I said, well, thank you. So we shared this scotch. And I thought that was funny. I said, I thought you only drank carrot juice. He said, no, that's been exaggerated. He said, but he said, still, you try to do things in moderation. He said the same thing. And I remember I said to him that it must be fantastic, the way these people, all this love for what you're doing, to feel this, love for, I mean, you sound great and you deserve it, but, it must be amazing to feel that. He said, well, it does feel wonderful. It feels good. He says, but the thing is, just like alcohol or anything, he said, you have to find the middle ground. He said, audiences are very fickle. So they could love you one day, and then another day, they're indifferent. So you can't you can enjoy what they give you, that they like it, and be somewhat upset if everybody doesn't like it. But nevertheless, the challenge is to maintain the middle ground. And I never forgot that. He talked about that. And that made a lot of sense to me. And so I came back the next night. And again, between sets, I sat with Sonny and we talked. And then he said, I'd asked him, that's right. He said, from the way you talk about music, you must play pretty well. Do you? And I had to really think about that. Because, I was just turning 20 and I was playing pretty well. I'd already taught a couple classes. I played with Jackie Byard, and I had some accomplishment for that. I played with Ira and Konitz, and nobody had thrown me off the bandstand yet. So I thought I was okay. But just having heard Sonny play this amazing stuff, I had to really think about it when he said, you must play pretty well, do you? So it took me a minute to answer. And finally I said, yeah, I can play. And then Sonny broke into this big, radiant smile. And he said, and sorry if I do an impression of you, but I have to do a bad impression. But isn't it nice when you know you're good? And then I thought that was quite something. I said, I asked Sonny, I said, by the way, not by the way, but I'm moving back to New York, and I would really love to study with you. And Sonny said, oh, I'm sorry, I don't teach. And I was kind of disappointed. I said, yeah, I understand that. And then he said, but we can practice together. And I was like, oh. So then we did. And I learned a lot from Sonny over the years. He's somebody that can just say a little something, and you get it. Like, he's often talked to me about seeing the big picture. He says most people think in snapshots, try to see things in terms of a bigger picture. And I thought that was, something that has affected me in my Weltschmerz, my view of the world. Another thing he said that was particularly brilliant that I can give you as musical advice or something was when Jimmy Lyons, the saxophone player, not the concert promoter, who played a lot with Cecil Taylor, passed away. I told Sonny I'd recently seen him not too long ago in the repair shop, Saul Fromkin's shop, and we had engaged in this lovely duet together. And Jimmy was very heavily influenced by Charlie Parker, as I was, but he played with Cecil Taylor, which was a very free jazz situation. And Sonny said that, Jimmy had been the one to help him understand Cecil because he couldn't really get it. But when he heard Jimmy kind of translating it and using the Charlie Parker language as a medium in between, he got to understand that. He could hear Cecil better. And then he said that it made him think that saxophone players were often translators of pianists. And I thought that was a very insightful thing. Like he said, he himself was trying to translate the language of Bud and Thelonious Monk into saxophone language, saxophone terms. And Charlie Parker had been translating Tatum, as was Don Byas, and Coleman Hawkins to an extent were coming from that. And then Don Byas and Bird had the additional influence of Bud and Monk, Elmo Hope, people that were on the scene. And, so I had a lot of relevant conversations about music and about spirituality and, various all over the map with Sonny, and his wife Lucille was also great. We would have a lot of nice conversations because sometimes I would call Sonny and he would be out practicing in the shed. He had a literal woodshed in where he where he lived, Germantown, New York. And so Lucille and I would talk for a while, and that was always delightful. Anyway, that's about it for today, folks. That's my podcast with myself, and Jesse's smiling there,
and we greatly apologize that Jack Walrath isn't here. We're not sure what happened. We hope Jack's okay. We're sure it's probably just a misscheduling. So we'll see Jack again soon, I'm sure.
I think it's my own fault. Usually I call people the day before, and I had talked to Jack last week about it, and I probably, I'll take the blame for that. And I guess nobody called in, so I hope that if you enjoyed this, you'll give us a like and keep us, stay in tune with us for future jazzability sponsored, well, not sponsored, jazzability projects, and broadcast them on the real side, which is what you've been watching. Today was on the real side. I'm Bob Mover, Jesse Kaiser, and our producer, and we thank you. So good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this, and may God bless you.
And thank you for joining us. We'll see you all next week.
Thank you for joining us.